I did it. I finally played Morrowind. I finally understand all the jokes about Enwas and boots of blinding speed and the guy with the scrolls and the axe and the stump. I know all about the limeware platter and the soul gem glitch. I've experienced all the beautiful N64 graphics and racism that Morrowind has to offer, and I finally completed my pilgrimage to all of the 3D Elder Scrolls games. So without further ado, let's jump into the wonderful world of Morrowind. Oh God, why do I run so slow? Why is quest information tracked in chronological order? Why do none of the NPCs speak? Why can't I do something as simple as sleep without the game trying to murder me and Dagoth Earth attempting to seduce me in my dreams? So yeah, for me, even as someone who played Oblivion and Skyrim, Morrowind took a lot of time to get used to because the game, well, it's clunky, and it is my absolute limit when it comes to old games, because usually I don't care about a game's age. To me, graphics don't matter as long as the game is fun. But with Morrowind, I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can do it. The text is so small and my eyesight is already so bad I walk around looking like Professor Farnsworth. Not to mention all of the clunky ass game mechanics and the awful early game. I move like a crippled snail and my character looks like a walking corpse. The main problem with Morrowind is that it has by far the worst early game of any game I have ever played. And I have played Dragon's Dogma, and the third quest in that game is a fucking 20-minute escort mission. Because in Morrowind, you start off moving like a crippled snail, everything kills you. Oh, and you can fail to do literally anything and everything in Morrowind. You can miss enemies regardless of how close you are to them, and merchants are gonna rip you the hell off and will refuse to go a septum higher if you attempt to haggle with them. Those Dark Brotherhood assassins thinking they can kill me in my sleep, little did they know that they just set me up for the rest of my financial future. Yes sirree, I'm getting off this shithole island. $7? You Mr. Krabs looking motherfucker, I knew I couldn't trust you. And your magic doesn't regenerate unless you sit there and rest for 73 hours and contemplate why you bothered to be a mage in the first place. Your spell chance can for some reason be negative too, which I'm not even sure what that translates to mechanically. Like what, are you giving the enemy a chance to cast a spell on you? Oh yeah, this will definitely show me a thing or two. However, I knew this going into Morrowind. I knew your magic didn't regenerate, and I knew that the combat looked and felt like slapping two jetpacks together, but I wasn't prepared for just how much of the game is determined by random dice rolls. For those of you who are blissfully unaware, the combat in Morrowind is based off dice rolls like in D&D. Who the fuck thought that that would be a good mechanic to carry over to a single player game with moment-to-moment gameplay? With D&D, if you fail a dice roll, whatever screwed up scenario that happens as a result and finding new ways around that is the whole fun of the game. In Morrowind, if I miss a dice roll, the cliff racer isn't just gonna suddenly stop attacking me and leave. It's gonna kill me every single time. There's nothing funny or entertaining about failing a dice roll in Morrowind. It isn't like I miss an attack and then suddenly decide, you know what, I don't want to fight game, you're right, and then go off and do something else. The dice rolls just get in the way and overcomplicate things. And this isn't an issue of age, because yeah, Morrowind is old, but there's plenty of other games from the same time period as Morrowind that have aged perfectly fine. It's just a dumb mechanic decision. If you want to block an attack, you don't manually block or press a button to block. You just put a shield on your character and the game will randomly decide if you block or not based on your skill. Enchantments too are completely random every time you put one on because they work on a magnitude slider. So when you make an enchantment that fortifies strength 40 to 45 points, it'll choose a random number between those two. You can also fail to lockpick, so you can go in your inventory, manually equip your lockpick because that's something you do in this game, and walk up to a lock only for it to not work. So you try again, and you try again, and you try again, and then eventually it works, and you sit there and think, wow, that was really unnecessary. The early game of Morrowind, it feels like you're being gaslighted every 5 seconds whenever you try something. Alright, let me just line up this shot, and boom, got him. You'll be missing and failing to hit pretty regularly until whatever weapon you chose is in the 50s or so. I'm surprised there wasn't a mechanic where you can just flat out fail to communicate with someone if your speechcraft is too low. This isn't related to dice rolls, this is actually a positive mechanic in my opinion, and it's that you can sell quest items, which I definitely didn't have to learn the hard way and then go back and reload a save because I forgot who I sold it to. The first 10 or so levels of Morrowind suck ass. I'm not even gonna defend it and say, oh, actually, I like not being able to hit enemies or run painfully slow because it makes you want to get better. Like, no, screw that. My experience would have literally only been improved had I been able to move at a decent pace and hit enemies. People say that your crappy start in Morrowind makes it feel more rewarding when you do eventually get powerful. I say that those people have Stockholm Syndrome because there are plenty of other games that made me feel like I earned my power without forcing me to move painfully slowly at the start or make it so I rarely hit enemies. You don't need to starve someone for 10 days for them to enjoy a meal, and you don't need to force someone to start off rock bottom in an RPG for progress to feel meaningful. Let's look at the beginning of Elder Scrolls games like cooking an egg. Oblivion and Skyrim, it takes just a few taps on the edge of the bowl for you to crack it open and you can start cooking. Both because those games have level scaling, but also because you just start off stronger than you do in Morrowind. With Morrowind, you gotta take a fucking sledgehammer to the egg and toss that shit against the wall, maybe even run it over with your car a few times, only for the game to gaslight you and say that you missed, but you refuse to let this outdated, even by 2002 standards, piece of shit game win, so you keep cracking it, and eventually, after 10 levels and 8 hours of gameplay, you're at the level of strength you would have already started at in Oblivion and Skyrim, and you cry yourself to sleep out of happiness, only for a cliff racer to spot you from across the map and start attacking you. Speaking of cliff racers, let's just get them out of the way because you can't really do anything involving Morrowind without bringing them up. The problem with cliff racers isn't how many there are or the noises they make. In fact, they're actually really weak and easy to take down even at lower levels. The real problem with cliff racers is how fast they attack you and how fast they move. And oh yeah, the fact that they don't stop chasing you. You want to have some fun in Morrowind? Try seeing how many cliff racers you can get to endlessly chase you. They can also even spot you and attack you inside of towns when you're just trying to turn in a quest. And eventually, even when I was able to one-shot them in the late game, every time I saw one, I'd just open up the console and go, there we go. Going back to the early game, the thing that makes it even worse is that Morrowind doesn't hold your hand, which feels really refreshing to have a video game not treat me like I dropped out of preschool, but it also unfortunately does a comically bad job at explaining some mechanics. Now let me make it clear, my issue isn't with the hallmarks of Morrowind, like the fact that you can't fast travel from anywhere, there's no quest markers, and you have to follow directions, because all of that honestly wasn't that bad. I thought the directions thing would end up being worse than it actually was, but they're extremely simple to follow. Alright, so to get to this mine, go to the stronghold and then head northeast. Okay, I'm at the stronghold. North is straight ahead and east is to the right. Oh. It's right there. But then other times, they'll give you some weirdly specific directions. Burial caverns lie to the southeast of the camp, a north-facing door in a little hill halfway between us and the slopes of Red Mountain. Go north from the camp to the water, then turn east at a rock cairn on the beach, turn and head straight south until you find the door. What do you mean southeast? And what the fuck is a rock cairn? Oh, come on, you couldn't have just had the big pile of rocks? You really had to say, head south from the rock cairn. Anyway though, I just wish the game had map markers for caves or ruins, since it doesn't make sense why if I follow road signs directly pointing me in the direction of a city, and I permanently get it marked on my map, but when I follow specific directions somewhere and find it myself, I have to do so again if I want to get there again or make a mental note of it. And it especially doesn't make sense because the game will mark certain places and ruins on your map, but then not others. My problem lies in the game's poor or lack of explanations for certain mechanics. For example, the spell descriptions for the most part are pretty straightforward. Firestorm does fire damage. Lightning Shield protects against lightning magic. Then there's some spells where the game decides to do that thing where you look up a word on Google and then it just repeats the word in the definition. Recall. Oh, that's what wasn't in Oblivion or Skyrim. I wonder what that does. Wow, why didn't I think of that? This also applies to some other spell effects, which I'll just put on the screen real quick, but the two biggest offenders of these four explanations are enchanting and luck. There is literally no tutorial for enchanting at all, and I went into this thinking that I had it all figured out. So I was going to enchant my armor to have a passive buff, right? But as I'm enchanting, I'm clicking on the icon to change the enchantment type, but nothing's happening. So I assume that constant effect enchantments are something they added later on in Oblivion. But then I find an item that has a constant effect enchantment and I look it up, and turns out you can't make constant effect enchantments unless you have a soul of a certain size, and only 6 creatures in the game have souls that big, 4 of which are unique enemies that don't respawn, one of which stops spawning after you beat the main game, and the other one you can just conjure and cheese, but still, the game made no mention of this. And it also didn't mention the fact that every item has its own enchantment value. There could have just been a little pop-up that says you need a soul of a size of 400 or higher, and that would have solved everything. Also, you can enchant your bow to do damage on strike, which is completely useless because the game registers it as your arrows hitting the enemy, not your bow. And Morrowind really should have told you what luck does. It gives this dumb fuck explanation of affecting every action in a small way like it's fucking IGN. Oh, the luck stat has a little something for everyone. In actuality, luck increases your chances for casting a spell, crafting potions, enchanting items, lockpicking, negotiating prices with a merchant, repairing items, and sneaking without being detected. Because yes, even sneaking is determined by dice rolls in this game. I wish I was making that up. The game will literally roll a dice every few seconds that you're sneaking to determine whether or not you're detected. In the early game, even when you spec out into what stats you want, you're really scraping for every single percentage you can get when it comes to chances. So why have such a complicated attribute that determines so many things and is pretty much necessary for every playstyle, and then just give it a grossly simplified explanation. It makes no sense. There's also the fact that advancing in each guild will increase or decrease the dispositions of other guilds, and nowhere is it made clear how the guilds specifically conflict. I know the game says that certain guilds clash and fight with each other, but it never says that that actually translates to disposition levels. I went to Sadrith Mora and every member of the town hated me and refused to speak to me, and I had no clue why until I looked it up and realized that it was because I was a member of the Mages Guild and not a member of Telvanni. I mean, there really couldn't have just been a little extra line of dialogue saying, "We don't like you because you're in the Mages Guild." Also, unlike Oblivion and Skyrim, you need to meet specific skill level requirements to advance ranks in guilds, which is a great feature and I have no idea why they got rid of it, but the game never makes it clear what the skill requirements are. I was doing a bunch of quests for the Fighters and Mages Guild and got really frustrated when I kept asking for advancement, but I never got it because before, it felt like it only took a few quests to advance in rank, and now I wasn't advancing regardless of how many quests I did, and the fact that I had my Longblade and Destruction, which are two skills that those guilds favor, at 100. And eventually I looked it up and realized that it wasn't a matter of how many quests I was or wasn't doing, it was because I didn't have two of their other favorite attributes at a specific level, which would have saved me a lot of frustration had the game just told me the specific requirements for the next rank when I ask for advancement, or telling me exactly how many quests I need to do. The game almost does this because it'll tell you that there's an issue with either the amount of quests you're doing or your skill level, but it never tells you how many more you need. The way it works is each rank in each guild requires you to have 3 of their favorite skills at certain levels, and the requirements for one of the skills goes up in increments of 10 while the other 2 go up in increments of 5. If that makes no sense to you, here's a picture of it. But basically, all this time, I more than met the requirements to advance in terms of main skill and quests, and I was wasting my time doing a bunch of boring fetch quests when all I needed to do was to train 2 other certain skills. And then when I did that, I shot up to the top of the rank of the guild immediately. I liked the way Morrowind didn't hold my hand by giving me a world and letting me do whatever I want without stopping me. What I didn't like is how it has these mechanics and systems that it doesn't bother to properly explain. Another small instance of this that I just remembered is that there's a part of the main story where you need to go through a door that only opens at dawn and dusk, but the game never indicates what times it considers as dawn and dusk, so instead of sitting there and wasting my time waiting hour by hour, I just looked up the times online. With how much outside research you have to do on the mechanics of the game, playing Morrowind honestly can be classified as a full-time job. I took physical notes. I have a fucking Morrowind journal sitting next to me in my drawer as I record this, and the scary part is, I don't even remember what any of this shit means, and I'm the one who wrote it. Because a quirky thing about me, right, is that I rarely take notes, so when I do, I make it something extremely vague and simple. So if I set a reminder to get my laundry, I'll just title it clothes or something, right? But the con of that is that much like what's happening right now, I look back at said notes a few days later and think to myself, why did I write the names of ancient Sumerian gods followed by Vivek Foreign Quarter? If you're a new player, do yourself a favor. If anything in Morrowind bothers you, whether it's the slow movement speed, the awful combat animation, or the fact that everything is RNG, if you have the means to do so, download some mods to fix it, or just cheese the game to make it easier. Some people will get really anal and say that you're ruining the experience for yourself and that you didn't actually play Morrowind because they have Stockholm Syndrome and want to justify their suffering. The whole game is about playing how you want. And if you want to streamline a few things, then go for it. In my eyes, the more people that experience Morrowind, the better, regardless of what they do to improve the experience for themselves. Morrowind isn't good because of the fact that you can shoot an arrow at point blank and the game considers it as a miss, or the fact that merchants offer $7 for something that's worth $40,000. Morrowind is good because of the lore, setting, and story. I mean, what are you gonna do? Be like, well, this movement speed and the fact that I don't regenerate magicka really annoy me, but when I asked on r/Morrowind for mods to fix it, the only comment I got was somebody responding with common Skybaby L. I don't want to upset them and be a common Skybaby L, so I'll just put up with it for my whole playthrough to please buttfucker69 on r/Morrowind. Like, nah man, do whatever you want. Who cares if you trim off some of the unnecessary fat and make it easier for yourself? So long as you're playing Morrowind and you're having fun, that's all that matters, regardless of what buttfucker69 tries to tell you. Speaking of conveniences, let's talk about fast travel in Morrowind, because as if living in the armpit of the empire known as Vardenfell, being called the inward every 3 feet wasn't bad enough, Morrowind also makes you use public transport. Which is funny because even though it doesn't have conventional fast travel, Morrowind still has the most modes of transport among all the 3D Elder Scrolls games. There's teleportation from the Mages Guild, the Silt Riders that I somehow never realized only operate on the west side of the map and who I want a plushie of because they are fucking adorable. Question isn't how many people would you kill for a Silt Rider, the real question is how many would you let live. The 3 different teleportation spells, and the real mode of transport, just saying fuck it and jumping from Vivec to Solstheim in one leap because you felt like it. If you don't believe me, here's a map of fast travel in Morrowind, and if you don't understand this, don't worry, neither do I, and I beat the game. I don't know how the hell Morrowind players are out here making the argument of, back in my day we didn't have fast travel, you had to take the damn bus argument, when all of their copies of the game not only came with a map that had every location in the game marked on it, but they also had the most convenient spells I've ever seen in a video game. Before I get to those, I'd like to say that no fast travel from anywhere is a feature specific to Morrowind, because you could pick any city and fast travel to it in Daggerfall, regardless of if you had already been there or where you were. So technically, being able to fast travel from anywhere is the real grandpa argument. Anyway, the convenience spells I mentioned earlier on are Mark and Recall, and you can use Mark to mark any point on the map and then use Recall to instantly teleport back there. Going through a dungeon, realize you're at full carry capacity and just plant a mark there. It's one of the intervention spells to go back to a town, sell all your stuff, and then use Recall to instantly go back to where you left off. And it is so convenient. You basically get to set your own fast travel point and can immediately go back to it for free, regardless of how far away you are and how long it's been since you cast a spell. And I legitimately would recommend you play Morrowind just so you can mess with these spells. That's how much fun they are. I mean, look at this. I have to kill this guy for a quest. So I put a mark on the quest giver, I went and killed the guy, and then I used Recall to instantly go back there and turn the quest in. I'm noticing a pattern where the further back I go through the Elder Scrolls series, it feels more like playing a new modern installment with all the different changes, which is extremely fun for someone like me who's going back through the series, but I imagine for someone on the opposite end, slowly seeing their favorite game remove more and more features without bothering to replace them and become a shell of its former self, isn't exactly ideal. Oh, okay, so you're removing a lot of the conjuration summons, but you're gonna replace them with new cool summons, right? No, especially because it's the removal of features and systems that don't make sense and limit player choice. I mean, just look at the list of conjurations from Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim. Morrowind had 15, Oblivion had 20, and Skyrim had 7. That's all in the vanilla game, by the way. I'm fine with certain enemies not returning game to game because they're specific to certain provinces, but Daedra exists in their own pocket dimension. It isn't like they ceased to exist after the Oblivion Crisis. And all of this is a long-winded way of saying that I want the Spider Daedra from Oblivion to come back for no particular reason besides the fact that I think they look neat. There's so much weapon diversity in Morrowind with the usual swords, maces, and axes, along with spears, halberds, and crossbows. And it isn't as if any of these weapons broke the game or made it unplayable. And it's even funnier because they added back in crossbows later on in Dawnguard, and a version of the class system in Oblivion and Starfield, and tried to pass both of them off as if they were new things. And it's like, where was that in the base game of Skyrim, huh? And by the way, Todd, I still remember. Actually, you know what? That isn't fair. Everyone always uses Todd as their punching bag when they rag on Bethesda, so let's pick on someone else who worked on Skyrim. Like, Jennifer Nolan, who worked on Quality Assurance. And by the way, Jennifer, don't think I forgot that Dawnguard was released on the Xbox 360 8 months prior to when it came out on the PlayStation 3. Yeah, that's right, I remember. All 5 of the PS3 Skyrim owners watching this who were also coincidentally there for that 8-month gap from June 2012 to February 2013 know exactly what I'm talking about. I see you, I was there. Other people will never understand what you and I went through. And this is where we get into the decade-old point of Elder Scrolls games being watered down. Honestly, even though I can agree that it's a bad thing, I don't think it was as dramatic or as big a problem people make it out to be until Skyrim. What I mean more specifically is the magic system, because that's really what's taking the most damage from game to game. And let's be honest, the only fun part of Morrowind's gameplay is the magic system. Everything else is pretty boring. And because I'm the kind of person who always orders chicken tenders at every restaurant I go to, and my only personality trait is the fantasy class I play, I exclusively play a spell sword in Elder Scrolls games, and Oblivion and Morrowind gave me an infinitely better experience doing so than I ever got from Skyrim because of spell making. That feeling of experimenting with the magic system to test its limits or creating the exact spell that I needed for my playthrough is so fun and so rewarding. I mean, how am I expected to play an Elder Scrolls game without a spell that paralyzes me for 30 seconds and raises my speed 100 points? It's essential to my build. I won't go too in depth into spell making because I already covered it in my Oblivion video, so if for some reason you want to watch a random dude on the internet talk about a mechanic from an RPG from 2007, There you go, I guess. But can we all just agree, regardless of what you think is the best game in the series, it's kind of silly how Elder Scrolls games suffer from problems that weren't present in previous installments? There were so many times playing Skyrim where small things bugged me, like man, I wish there were ranks in each guild, or man, I wish there was a spell that paralyzed me for 30 seconds. Only to realize in my respective playthroughs of Morrowind and Oblivion that the series already had those things. Even in my playthrough of Oblivion this happened to me. It bothered me that I couldn't delete spells, which you could already do in Morrowind, but they are removed in Oblivion for some reason. And the water walking in Oblivion bothered me too because you have to walk onto a body of water from land, and even then if you face the camera straight down you would still sink. Whereas in Morrowind, using water walking immediately puts you on the surface of whatever body of water you're on. And even if you look straight down, you won't sink. And another thing is that you could be a werewolf in Morrowind, but then you couldn't in Oblivion, but then you could again in Skyrim. Again, it's just small things like that which add up to make these games feel really inconsistent from installment to installment. It's like how Pokemon will have a really cool feature that everybody loves and then get rid of it and then never bring it up again. Oh, and speaking of suffering from problems that you already had the solution to, there was something funny about Morrowind. I never had to adjust the difficulty slider because it doesn't have horrific level scaling like Oblivion does. Well, Morrowind has level scaling in that certain enemies and loot spawn at higher levels, but it isn't as if the game comes down to your level. It more just meets your level and gives you more and more rewarding things to keep you more enticed the longer you play. I mean, how annoying would it be if even at level 40 you were still fighting cliff racers and guars? Which ties into another small problem that I have with these games. It's that there is absolutely no reason to play any of them at a high difficulty. Not only is there no unique challenge to it besides enemies do more damage and you take more damage, but in all of the games it isn't at all balanced. Your armor and weapons will literally fucking break before you finish fighting a basic enemy in Oblivion and Morrowind. And combat encounters, even at low levels, will take literal minutes for the exact same amount of XP you would have gotten at a lower level. The least you could do is have a higher difficulty but have more reward. I don't see how they overlooked such an obvious idea. Also, for everyone who's played or plays Morrowind on the Xbox, just out of curiosity, what's it like to play with a controller? This is completely unrelated to the video now, screw that. I'm just curious because the normal gameplay seems like it'd be fine, but the menus are so obviously tailored for mouse and keyboard that it seems like it'd be hell to navigate them with a controller. And I say that as someone who only got into PC gaming within the last 7 months, and before then exclusively played on PlayStation. You N-word! It wasn't surprising to me that I immediately liked the setting of Morrowind, because I remember first seeing my older brother play Dawnguard, by the way, 2 months after it came out on the Xbox 360, and after we spent 20 minutes laughing at how awful the waves look, we both agreed that we visually enjoyed Solstheim way more than Skyrim. I love the weird art style, and especially the architecture of Morrowind because I'm a fucking dork. There were so many moments where even if what I was seeing wasn't graphically impressive, because the game's color palette consists of 3 different shades of brown, the overall art style of it really wowed me. With Oblivion and Skyrim, you can see that the influence is very obviously just your traditional fantasy and medieval setting, and there's nothing wrong with that, but with Morrowind, it's just Morrowind. There's nothing else I can compare it to. There's nothing I can think of before or since it came out that I can compare it to. It's like Bethesda just created an entirely new world, rather than building one off of stereotypes. Just look at some of the eldritch abominations that this game calls enemies. They're also distinctly Morrowind. What other game manages to have robot dinosaurs and giant fleas and floating jellyfish and still manage to have a cohesive world visually? What I love especially is how every region of the game feels so unique, with the jagged rocks and tiny islands and the edges of the map and the different Icelander tribes, which are completely different from the Dunmeran cities with their weird ass names I can't pronounce. There's actually a distinct culture from every region of the map, unlike Skyrim and Oblivion where most of the differences are just visual. As much as I like the different areas in both of those games, there is no difference between the Colovians on the west side of the map, the Nibelungs on the east side and this weird little dangly bit, and the Heartlanders in the middle where Imperial City is. There's no difference between a Nord who lives in Riften compared to a Nord who lives in Markarth. But you know what Bethesda really excels at? It isn't their state-of-the-art, perfectly polished games or open worlds, it's their skyboxes. Because despite everything else in Morrowind looking like it belongs on an N64, and all the characters in Oblivion looking like melting cheese, the skyboxes for both games, and I don't know how, still look amazing. Not even in that subtly insulting way where people will compliment something old and say, it looks good for its time. No, the skyboxes in every Elder Scrolls game are always so good, and I have no clue how the hell they do it. I mean, what's there not to love about Morrowind? You got Cthulhu, Forbidden Puppy, and Steve. and you've got an extremely friendly and welcoming local populace who can't go 2 seconds without calling you the N-word. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said that you can fail to do literally anything and everything in Morrowind, because you can even fail to be a Dunmer in this game. Even if you play as a Dunmer, they still call you Outlander because apparently you aren't a real Dunmer because you weren't born and raised in Morrowind. Oh yeah, you don't think I'm a real Dunmer because I wasn't born here? Well, you don't even actually live on the mainland of Morrowind. You live on the island around it. Turns out you're the Outlander. In fact, if you want to get that specific about it, why even call the game Morrowind? That's like making a game called America and then setting it in one of those imaginary states like Idaho or Nebraska. Why is there racial gatekeeping in a fantasy game of all things? Oh yeah, you're a dark elf? Name every dark elf. Can that even be classified as racism anymore? That's beyond racism at that point. That's racism too. Do you people like anybody? So let me get this straight. You use Argonians, Orcs, Khajiits, and even your own race as slaves. You hate every other race because they aren't Dunmer. You hate Dunmer who aren't born in Morrowind. And depending on who you are, you still hate native Dunmer if they weren't born in a city. How's an NWA supposed to get some dun mussy in this cultural hellhole? And I can't talk about the world of Morrowind without bringing up everyone's favorite city, Vivec. I mean, we all love Vivec, right guys? It's so easy to navigate. Every canton looks so unique. In actuality though, even if it is horrible to go through, I really do appreciate Vivec as a premise, because besides Imperial City, it's the only city in an Elder Scrolls game which took me more than 3 return visits to completely memorize. Which is something that I want more of in Skyrim 2 when it comes out. Big, sprawling, unique cities with a bunch of cool architecture, like Novigrad from The Witcher 3 and Grand Sorin from Dragon's Dogma. Speaking of cities, shout out to the best Elder Scrolls city, Markarth. And also a special shout out to all of Morrowind's Daedric ruins with all these goofy ass names, like Ashur Shnash Betashbi and Adash Snashinamu and Ashlimimilakala and Almir Blarami, which are impossible to pronounce without sounding as if you're invoking an ancient Sumerian ritual. My personal favorite ruin, Milk. Oh fuck me, this is gonna be a long segment. Well, in an attempt to make this still entertaining and funny, I'll avoid using the word lore, and instead I'll use a random synonym for it, regardless of if that word actually fits the sentence. The story in Morrowind is the best out of, I guess, the main Elder Scrolls games because it's exactly what I want, in that the plot and setting are complicated and it demands you to actually pay attention and learn about this amazing world around you. Normally when it comes to mythology, I skip over it because most books and video games don't give you a good reason to care about it. It always feels detached from the main story and like an afterthought where the writer or creator wanted to tell the specific story about, I don't know, monsters, and then halfway through they were like, oh shit, I gotta explain where the monsters came from. It feels less like a core part of the story being told, and more so the sprinkles you throw on top of your ice cream to make it look a little nicer, even though we all know that sprinkles add nothing to ice cream and it's the worst topping. And anyone who says it's your favorite topping does not have taste. But Morrowind, oh man, Morrowind. Morrowind is like adding hot fudge or crushed Oreos to your ice cream and how it perfectly blends the know-how of the Elder Scrolls universe and its story. The Elder Scrolls is all kinds of wacky with its erudition about swords gaining sentience and how the stars are actually just holes in the sky. So to finally have a plot which embraces that and tell an interesting story with good characters and history is amazing, and it's what Elder Scrolls games need to be, especially coming off of Oblivion and Skyrim, where the story is your typical good versus evil. They don't have any reason or need to look any deeper into the main villains or their motivations, which is a shame because if you've played Knights of the Nine and you've never looked into Paladin Whitestrake, you're missing out, I'll just say that much. Morrowind actually made me care about what was happening since it was so interwoven with the plot, because everything in its story is so complex and fascinating with the tribunal and the story of Indral Nerevar. 40% of Morrowind is actually playing the game, and the other 60% looks a little something like this.
Dagoth achieved the opposite of Kim, a so-called anti-Kim. Because
the good Daedra, led by Boethia, exposed the lies of the Aedra and denounced Trinimac as the biggest liar of all.
Because facts don't care about their feelings.
The Dunmer, as well as the kind of the Forger,
it's 100% worth it to be a retard,
which served as the catalyst for the Stormcloak Rebellion,
I have tits
arousing the most
Walter's meth has nothing on this shit.
wood throughout the era.
I didn't know a whole lot or even care about Dark Elves before playing Morrowind, but now they're my favorite race and I actively want to learn as much about them as possible. Whereas after playing Oblivion and Skyrim, I didn't really care or know anything about Nords or Imperials. And it isn't as if Nords or Imperials are boring. There's plenty of interesting mythos about both of them, and all the races in this world are extremely interesting. It's just that Oblivion and Skyrim did a very poor job at making you care about or portraying their respective races' unique culture and customs, which isn't helped by the fact that Skyrim makes it very difficult to distinguish distinguish the different human races. I mean, fuck, while making this video, I learned that Delphine is a Breton and Serana is a Nord, which completely blew my mind because I thought it was the other way around. Morrowind is also really heavy on my favorite aspect of the Elder Scrolls adage, which is the Protheans. I mean the Dwemer. Morrowind not only shows you what they look like with statues of them and this funny looking ghost dude, but the game just casually drops the last living Dwemer on you without any forewarning. Go downstairs, I have an interesting subject. You have a historical artifact is what you have. And this is kind of embarrassing to say, but it wasn't until playing Morrowind that I learned that the mystery behind the Dwemer isn't why they disappeared, it's what happened to them after they disappeared. Which is something that I never knew because all the characters in game always talked about it as if one day they just vanished and no one knows why. When in reality, they disappeared because they messed with the heart of Lorkhan. The interesting thing about this is that the know-how for the Elder Scrolls universe as a whole, but especially the Dwemer, is written intentionally vague, so you can make your own interpretation about it. For example, Yagran Bagarin says, "I think Kagranak might have succeeded in granting our race eternal life, with consequences such as displacement to another realm, or he may have erred and destroyed our race." There isn't really a set answer because nobody knows, and it's up to you to decide. Another example of this is Skyrim, where your character is referred to as the last Dragonborn by Mirak, which could mean last as in after you there's no more Dragonborn like the last Airbender, or it could mean last as in the most recent Dragonborn, like in the sentence, "the last time I went to the store." Much like a real world, there's propaganda and people who will lie to you for their own gains, and it's up to you to figure out what you think is true, such as Vivek, who tells you to go read 2 accounts of what happened at Red Mountain and decide which you believe to be true, which is complicated because technically every account of what happened at Red Mountain is true but also false. It makes sense, I promise. Now earlier on I said the story and characters in Morrowind were great, but now I really want to get into that. I'll start with the story as a whole and then move on to the story that you actually play through, so like the different quests and stuff. I won't be summarizing the whole story because there's plenty of other videos that do that way better than I ever could. I'll more just be pointing out different bits of it that I enjoyed. The best thing Morrowind does is how it gradually builds up the villains and characters in it. The biggest complaint about Oblivion and Skyrim is that the quote-unquote main villain barely has any presence in the game and only shows up for a big epic battle at the end. In Morrowind, Dagoth is built up through all the books you read and the shrines you can find out in the world and the NPCs who talk to you about him, and all the sleepers who attack you throughout gameplay and the weird-ass fanfics for dreams that he sends you. He takes on this almost boogeyman role where even though you don't know him or know what he looks like, it feels like he's always there peeping over your shoulder. But the game ultimately subverts that when you do eventually meet him and he openly welcomes you, regardless of if you intend to betray or join him, which should have been an option, and it was going to be an option but it got cut from the game, but whatever. Every NPC calls you an Outlander every 5 seconds and refuses to believe that you're the Nerevarine until you do some subservient task for them. But regardless of your race or intentions, Dagoth is the one person who welcomes you because after thousands of years, he just wants to see his friend again. And oh, his voice. I'm not gay, but when Dagoth calls me Moon and Star, oh man, get me all hot and bothered. You busy after this, Dagoth? You wanna go do something? Also, I don't know how I never noticed this, but Dagoth is actually wearing a mask, and if you go behind him, you can see that he actually has long hair. I don't know how, I only ever saw pictures of him from the front. I just thought they looked like that. I didn't think he was wearing a mask. While we're here talking about his appearance, I love this animation he does in the Heart Chamber. He's all just like... The story of the Tribunal is so fascinating and tragic since they can't technically be classified as full-on bad guys, which might be a bit confusing because I'm about to list off all their negative traits, but just bear with me, okay? Although they're egotistical, the Tribunal started off with good intentions. Well, as good intentions as you can have when you betray and murder someone you love for power, and also curse your entire race, just to make it seem as if you're the good guy and have them worship you. That's right, in case you didn't know, it's because of the Tribunal that Dark Elves are dark, because they mess with the heart of Lorkhan, which, if you don't know about the heart of Lorkhan... So one day, this guy Lorkhan got bored and said to his friends, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we made a universe? But little did all of his friends know that the universe was a multi-level marketing pyramid scheme, and after investing all their money in Lorkhan's bitch-ass crypto scam, they were left with next to nothing, and they said, hey, fuck you, Lorkhan, and they took his heart and judo threw it into reality. And this guy Kagranak came along and was like, hey, look, the essence of creation, don't mind if I do, which went against the beliefs of the Dunmer, who weren't actually Dunmer at this point, and there was this whole big war, which resulted in the Dunmer's Wikipedia page being turned into a past tense, and these 3 assholes murdering this guy because they wanted to be gods, and they knew that he wouldn't let them. And as punishment, this actual god named Azura said, fuck you, now you're gay. I mean, now you're gray, and gave their entire race of people gray skin and red eyes, just like her. And that, kids, is why the Dark Elves are gray. Because 3,750 years ago, 3 assholes were like, oh hey look, the essence of creation, don't mind if I do, and killed their best friend and cultural icon of their people. And that isn't even mentioning the giant ass mech. While Silthacil is off living life in creative mode, Vivek and Almalexia use this false power to lord over their people and abolish their rule with some genuine acts of kindness, but there is a very strong manipulative undertone to all of it. Such as how Vivek stopped this rock from hitting his city, and instead of getting rid of it, he was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave that there as a threat so that you will never stop worshipping me. Or how Almalexia creates ash storms and Mournhold in an attempt to scare people into reminding her what she's capable of. Which is some serious clown shit, because how are you gonna claim to be the savior and mother of your people while killing and betraying your husband and then throwing ash storms and mechanical monsters at your people? Don't think I'm leaving Vivek out of this, because I read all 36 volumes of his gay Tumblr fanfiction about how he had sex with Molag Bal for 80 days straight, had thousands of kids, and how he cut off his penis and then used it as a spear. Almost like a biblical retelling of that story about the guy who jacked off 62 times straight and then ripped his dick off and died. Vivek's gay fanfiction also gave me the knowledge of the worst euphemism for penis that I have ever heard. Milkfinger, which is an absolutely putrid combination of words, and if I have to know about it, then so do you. Actually, my favorite part of the 36 sermons is when Vivek and Nerevar apparently walked across the ocean to Akavir, Atmora, and Yakuta, which isn't possible, but whatever. And when the sermons talk about them going to Yakuta, all it says is they came to the west where the black men dwell. Which, yeah, makes sense in this world because there's only one race of black people, but something with that sentence is so funny to me. It's probably the contrast of the blunt wording compared to the fantastical wording of Atmora and Akavir. They walked north to the Elderwood. They crossed the eastern sea to the land of snakes and snow demons. And then they came to the west where the black men dwelt. In the sermons though, Vivek literally admits to killing Nerevar, but then tries to pass it off as, you know, that wasn't me. That was Vivek the mortal. I'm Vivek the god. Like, shut up, you Ben and Jerry's half and half split die looking motherfucker. I know what you did and or didn't do. But despite all that, you still can't deny the fact that even though they're assholes, the tribunal did at least some good. I mean, they did bring in this 1,000-year era of prosperity from Morrowind after receiving their powers, and gave people something to believe in for thousands of years, even if it was extremely fake. And Vivek and Silthacil do both regret killing Nerevar, I think. The whole story has this underlying sadness to it, knowing that eventually by the time of Skyrim and Dragonborn, the Ministry of Truth fell into Vivek and destroyed all of Vardenfell, which is an event that you, as a Nerevar, technically set into motion. Even though it was a necessary evil because the alternative would have been Dagoth or winning, there's just something about it. Seeing all these people who were once so close turn on one another, and knowing that the game world that you're in will eventually cease to exist. Actually, something else that's pretty interesting is that there is an NPC in Tribunal who basically spells out the entire plot of Oblivion, and when Caius leaves to the Imperial City, he hints at things that happened in Oblivion, which makes me extremely curious to see if there is some line of dialogue which just spells out the story of Skyrim 2 whenever that comes out. Now all that is great, but the actual quests in the main story, they're not that great, I'll just be honest. A lot of it is your typical go here and do this, and even if the content that is being discussed is interesting, what you're actually doing most of the time isn't. In typical Elder Scrolls fashion, there is a lot of characters you'll meet throughout the story that just don't matter after you speak with them and who immediately get forgotten about. You remember Halia, the Argonian informant in Vivek, or this guy whose name I can't pronounce, who you had to get poetry for? Of course you don't, because they don't matter as soon as you get information out of them. And this is entirely an issue with the characters themselves, because Yagran Bagarn and Divaith Feared don't appear again in the story after you get cured from Corporus, but they're both still fan favorite characters because they're actually interesting. So it's weird. The writing, main characters, and actual content of the story is amazing. The actual quests in it suck. Even if I didn't enjoy the gameplay of the main quest though, I was on the edge of my seat wanting to know what happened next. But I assume you've played these games before, unless you haven't, which in that case don't. But if you have, you know. You already know. You know that every main quest always has that one section. Anyone who's replayed these games after writing a 300-page long Google Doc for your character's RP backstory, which doesn't at all translate to gameplay, understands that familiar feeling you get whenever you get to Delphine's part of the story in Skyrim, or the War Council, the Daedric artifact part in Oblivion. While in Morrowind, that part of the story is having to become Hortator and Nerevarine of all of the Ashlander camps. For those of you who haven't played Morrowind, don't. But at a certain point in the story, you're tasked with going to all the 3 great houses and the 3 other Ashlander tribes and doing quests for them so they actually recognize and acknowledge you as Nerevarine. There's reasons why this is important, but they do not at all translate to gameplay. Because at this point in the story, I felt as if everything was starting to reach the climax. Kaya suddenly left the Imperial City, and you finally learn the secrets of the Tribunal and get named Nerevar by Azura herself. But then the game still says, hold up a minute. Yeah, you may have been given this ring that would kill anyone who isn't Nerevar if they tried to wear it, but I still don't believe you. Can you go get me some shoes? And this entire chunk of the game absolutely kills the pacing. And it especially annoyed me since none of the people you help end up assisting you in the final battle. And they just give you these items that are probably worse than what you already have at that point. Also, speaking of the final battle, I know some of this is just technical limitations, but the whole thing felt very anticlimactic. When you finally go up Red Mountain to confront Dagoth-Ur, it actually feels pretty epic, but a lot of that excitement was probably just me making up my own fun in my head, because in reality, the game didn't exactly help with that. Since that epic final confrontation will be interrupted by cliff racers, and your triumphant walk out of Red Mountain will also be interrupted by cliff racers. I mean, they could have at least had a specific song that played during the final confrontation. It's hard to get pumped and feel like you're confronting the demon of Vardenfell after an entire game of being hunted by him when the music sounds like this. The only good thing about that part of the story though is that you can do them in any order, and if you're over level 20 and have 50 reputation, you can just skip this whole segment, or you can just kill Vivek and take Wraithguard to Yager and Bagarn to get it fixed, although it isn't coded correctly. So instead of giving you 200 points of health, it'll damage you 200 points of health. But neither of those things make up for just how badly it kills any sort of pacing the story had. In fact, if you really want, you can get a levitation scroll and go over the Ghost Gate to Dagoth-Ur early, get a spell that opens locks of 100 and get to Vivek early, and skip the entire main quest as a whole. The fact that the 2 of them are actually in those locations, and they have unique dialogue, and the game just doesn't shut down because it's like, no, we don't want to show you that yet, is amazing. Not that their dialogue is very interesting, both of them basically just default to, oh hey, you don't have the thing, you can't be here. But it was surprising because everyone always praises Breath of the Wild for the fact that if you want, you can skip the whole main story and go straight to Hyrule Castle. And the last place I expected to see that same amount of freedom is a game from 2002, much less an Elder Scrolls game. Speaking of freedom, another thing that surprised me about Morrowind is that you can kill anyone you want, even main characters in the story. You know how you'll be playing an RPG, and then your intrusive thoughts win, and you just have to shoot your companion, and the game has some shit-ass pop-up like, Veronica has been knocked unconscious. Her ass is not unconscious, okay? She's dead. She's dead. Well, in Morrowind, that doesn't happen. If you so want, you can kill anyone, and so can random enemies, which also applies to even minor characters in the story. So you can be doing an escort mission and spawn in a Daedroth, and forget that they have an AoE poison spell, which kills your escort, and you'll be forced to reload a save from 45 minutes ago, which is purely hypothetical and definitely never happened to me. The last thing I'll mention about the story is the fact that Morrowind doesn't immediately make you as the player feel overly special. For the first segment of the game, you're investigating a prophecy about the Nerevarine, and it takes a while before the game even starts entertaining the idea that it could possibly be you. You actually earn the title by passing different trials, and although I still think the Hortator and Ashlander Nerevarine part of the story sucked, and the ring Azura gave you should have carried way more sway, I do much prefer gradually becoming the hero, as opposed to just being given the hero mantle 3 missions in the main story. Oh, and the fact that like in Oblivion, when you finish Morrowind, people will recognize you, and you can say, hey, I'm the Nerevarine, and you get a 10-point disposition buff. An entire area of the map changes, a weather pattern stops, and an entire enemy type disappears from the game, whereas in Skyrim, like I mentioned in my Oblivion video, you beat Alduin and guards still speak to you as if you're level 1, and you can still find dragons flying around the map. I seriously don't understand how Bethesda games have a problem they had a solution to in a previous installment 10 years ago. In fact, a majority of the side quests in Morrowind are basic fetch quests, assassinations, or collecting items with no particularly interesting stories or characters involved in them. Some of them are interesting, like the serial killer in Vivek and Umbra, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. And this, unfortunately, is the case for a lot of the guilds, because they don't function like an Oblivion and Skyrim. They aren't their own separate storylines. It's more just doing odd jobs every now and then and climbing the rank. And to Morrowind's credit, there are a lot of factions and guilds to join, and I couldn't do all of them on one playthrough because my character didn't have the right stats for it, which is great. But anyway, the guilds are good early on for earning XP and gold and getting used to the game and exploring new areas, but after a certain point, it becomes really difficult to keep doing them because their quests aren't interesting and the rewards just stop being worth it, especially since the great houses give better rewards in houses, and the fact that Morrowind has the most comically expensive items in any other Souls game. Oh boy, 500 gold. It isn't as if I have an item which is worth 80,000. I've seen some people say that they prefer this because it allows for better role-playing, which I can see since not everyone wants to do a guild quest line knowing that they'll be the center of everything and eventually no matter what rise to the top of the guild. But a good quest line and the opportunity to roleplay aren't mutually exclusive, which is something that unfortunately none of the three main games have really succeeded with, except the Dark Brotherhood and Oblivion. Oh my god, that was amazing. In Morrowind, the quests are too boring, and in Oblivion and Skyrim, you don't really feel as if you're part of the guild, because there's not much to do outside of their respective quest line, and you're always immediately the most important member of that guild. Oblivion had every opportunity to make the Arcane University an awesome, sprawling magic school in the heart of Tamriel's biggest city, where you can attend classes and lectures, but instead, it's a single courtyard, and after you get your robes and staff, you spend all your time hunting necromancers, and you never get to actually just be a student for a bit. And before you know it, you're the Archmage. And the same can be said for Skyrim's Mages Guild. You take one actual class in this derelict building with 3 other students, and then a member of the fucking Psijic Order comes to you to tell you how important you are. That sentence alone is worth its entire own 4-hour video essay as to why it's so ridiculous, but we're not gonna go there. Something that happens to me pretty often while doing guild quests is that after taking a break from playing for a few days, I'd come back and have a quest to turn in, but I'd forget who the person was. The quest log would say Mages Guild or Fighters Guild, but not which branch and which town specifically. So I'd look for the name in the journal to see if there's any information on them, only to find there wasn't. Because why would there be a journal entry on a quest giver in a faction when I can have 3 different entries for enchantments? Or completely empty and useless entries like this, or a transcript of a quest I did 20 hours ago. Another annoying thing is that when you become the head of whatever faction or guild you're in, whatever quests you took out are still active and you can't cancel them out. The worst kind of quest though is by far the escort missions. Oh my god. The AI run painfully slow and they follow the exact pathing you take. If you go even slightly too far, they'll end up running in circles until you manually go back and tell them to follow you. And despite having glass bones and paper skin, they'll run off and do their damn best to beat that cliff racer to death, only to get one shot by a Daedrot's AoE poison spell and force you to reload a save from 45 minutes because that character was essential to the main story and you can't progress otherwise, which never happened to me, by the way. The most annoying part is that this is literally only a problem with the escort AI, because the enemy AI and pathing is annoyingly good and they will hunt you to the ends of the earth regardless of how far you are, regardless of what other enemies are around you. They are fucking determined. Those cliff racers will aggro you all the way from High Rock, yet the dark elf I'm escorting gets lost when I go over a hill. And the rewards for them are hardly ever worth the trouble they take. After 1 or 2 of them, I would just open the console and give the character 400 speed and 5,000 health because I just could not be bothered anymore. I mentioned earlier how the guild quests serve as a good way for you to explore new areas, but honestly, the same can be said for the whole game. Regardless of what you choose to do in Morrowind, you will eventually always end up going to every city and every small town. And you're really forced to explore the island, which I did really enjoy early on because it pushed me out of my comfort zone. And my favorite part of any game is slowly becoming more and more familiar with the map. But I'd be lying if I said that later on it didn't get a bit annoying just wanting to advance in rank in a guild, only to be sent all the way from Aldruin to Voss. There is one section of the main quest where in just 3 quests, you go from Balmora to the Ursulaku camp, then back to Balmora, then to Gnissis or Genesis, whatever, then to Telfur on the other side of the map. Just to give you an example of this. Again, it was fun early on, but after you've been playing for a while, it's just like, why are the people you want me to kill always in a different zip code? Alright, Nerevar, there is this guy who's been talking some mad shit. I need you to go there and teach his ass a lesson. I'll mark it on your map, he's right here. It reminds me of the main quest line in Dawnguard, where a majority of the quests are going back and forth between Fort Dawnguard and Castle Volkihar. But by far, my least favorite quest was the Telvanni quest to build your stronghold. There are so many steps, and half of them are just reporting back to Lena Horan. only for her to send you back to the area where your house is like 3 times. But with that being said, the overall quest design of having no quest markers and having to speak to NPCs to find someone was actually really fun. There were a few times when no matter who I spoke to, I couldn't ask about the character I wanted to know about in dialogue options, even though I was in the right town, because I could only ask about the NPC in a specific building, which was kind of aggravating, but it didn't happen often enough for it to be a constant problem. Actually, funny story. So the other day, when I was taking my $500 in groceries out of my car, I saw 2 cops in the parking lot of the apartment complex that I live in. When I came back out because I'm a bitch and I couldn't get all the groceries in one trip, they came up to me and said, "Excuse me, have you seen this man? He lives here and he drives this car." And I didn't know who it was, but I did recognize the car they mentioned, so I said I haven't seen him, but I do know he works right down the road. So I gave them directions to where he works. "Oh, you just turn left when you first leave and it'll be at the first stoplight down the road." And as they said, "Thanks, we appreciate it," and drove off in their car, I sat there and I slowly realized, oh my god, I am a Morrowind NPC. Here is a critically important tip. Kinda weird as at the last part of the video, but whatever. If you want to kill someone in Morrowind, make sure you taunt them into attacking you, or use a frenzy spell, because there's a quest that the shit-ass Larius Vero gives you where you have to kill 5 people, which if you don't provoke the people into attacking you, will send your bounty so high that you will get a death warrant, which means that guards will attack you on sight, regardless of how many hours you wait, regardless of the fact that his shit-ass clears your bounty, regardless of what console commands you enter, and even when you're level 45, there will still be Imperial guards who will randomly aggro you and chase you to the ends of Nirn for a quest you did an in-game year ago, but of course, that never happened to me. In short, Morrowind is a great, albeit extremely dated first-person shooter with a fan base that contains the kind of people who absolutely love keeping their opinions to themselves, and who tell you to go south-southeast when giving directions in the car, instead of just saying turn left at this light, and who'd list off directions to you for 20 minutes, instead of just giving you an address to put into Google Maps. Sarcasm aside though, there's a lot of things Morrowind does perfectly, like its story and player freedom, the magic system, and pretty much nothing else, but its side quests and RNG mechanics, for lack of a better word, are horseshit. Honestly, it's kind of crazy how each Elder Scrolls game does something really amazing, but then drops the ball everywhere else. Morrowind has a great story and characters, Oblivion has the best side quests, and Skyrim is a video game.
Welcome, moon and star, come to me through fire and war. Oh, oh, come Nerevar, come and look upon my heart,